voters. Tories, we were sort of speculating. There were an awful lot of opinion polls that were talking about them being down to 70, maybe even being reduced to being the third party. That was always an outsider. Nonetheless, down to 121, 23.7% of the vote. In other words, just roughly speaking, 10% behind the Labour Party, 6.8 million votes. In parliamentary terms, we then have the Liberal Democrats, 64 seats, 12.2% of the vote, and 3.5 million voters. And of course, what I've left out is reform, and although it only got, five MPs, actually got over 4 million votes. I think it was 4 million, 4.1 million votes. The problem is that when we take the left, a lot of the left looked at these results and basically celebrated it because of the low turnout, for example, the fact that in spite of this huge parliamentary majority that the Labour Party got, it only got, roughly speaking, the same percentage of the vote as the Labour Party got last time round under Jeremy Corbyn. And this is meant to be a cause for some sort of celebration, or at least some sort of consolation as far as the left is concerned. Now, myself, again, this is, how should I put it, make-believe, I know. But I think, where we're at can be garnered not only from the fact that the Labour Party has got this huge parliamentary majority, but if we actually add together the total Tory vote with the Reform vote. Remember last time, it wasn't Reform, of course, it was a Brexit party, but in the conditions of Boris Johnson 2019, make it happen and all the rest of it, if you recall, the Brexit party stood down and it basically called for people to vote Tory. Boris Johnson, I don't know all the ins and outs in terms of total votes. Nonetheless, it produced him an overwhelming parliamentary majority, nothing like Starmer. I think from my memory, wasn't it about 80 seats, something like that, majority. But that does tell you something. If you add the 4 million votes to the 9 million, nearly 10 million Tory votes, that tells you where sort of opinion is in Britain. And it also tells you that the result could have been different. Now, of course, then we get into the sort of alternative history, and you don't really want to go there because all you need to do is one or two ifs, and quite frankly, you're in science fiction land. We need to understand that when it came to the left's victories, and I'm using the word now, the left, very much with inverted commas, when it came to the independents, for example, specifically the independents standing on a pro-Palestine platform, that this was the result, both, of course, of what has been going on in Gaza, specifically Palestine in general, the massive demonstrations that we've seen in London, and is, I presume, maybe even still on now as I speak. But it was always on the basis that the Labour Party was going to win. And I think that's been clear, at least when it comes to opinion polls, for a very long time. I have to say, not in order to puff myself up, but I was convinced that not only would Keir Starmer win the contest to replace Jeremy Corbyn, but I had a pretty sneaking suspicion, just looking at the mess that the Tories were in, and he was going to be Mr. Sensible, although he had that very rocky, I wouldn't call it a honeymoon, whatever the hell the opposite of a honeymoon is, rocky patch in his leadership of the Labour Party. Although he had that, my own feeling was that Keir Starmer would lead the Labour Party to a victory. But of course, I didn't guess the extent of that victory. And I think precisely if we look at Rishi Sunak, when he called the general election campaign, well, it wasn't so much, his to lose. He'd already lost, and perhaps he could, pull the irons from the fire. Perhaps he could do anything, but I think the result was pretty clear. He couldn't do anything right. You had the debacle, didn't you, at Dunkirk? And it reminds me in that sense of the premiership of Gordon Brown. He couldn't even sign his own name without the press ganging up on him and saying how incompetent he is. And inevitably, although it took a damn long time for Paul DeMarty's prediction in the Weekly Worker, at the last moment, we had the Murdoch press coming over, calling for a Labour vote. It took a damn long time. It wasn't the same thing as Blair. Nonetheless, I think that what you can say is that they were determined to back a winner. It wasn't the Sun what done it, but the Sun wanted to identify with who won. And I actually think the same goes, chicken and egg. I know you can get into that debate, that when it comes to the city, when it came to various businessmen, and it tends to be businessmen, throwing money at the Labour Party, this was very much about opening doors for a government that they saw coming. And if you take the lobbyists, if you take the business concerns, if you actually take the individuals, they thought that the Labour Party was going to win, and they wanted to develop relationships with the incoming government. So I don't think it was big business and their money what did it. I don't think it was the Sun what did it. Nonetheless, the fact that you had a Labour Party that looked like it was on the course to win, and then you had Reform UK saying that they weren't going to step down, and then confirming it in that sense, maybe tilting things even further against the existing government. You had Nigel Farage throwing his hat in, saying that he was going to stand as an MP. Now, again, I don't know what the result would have been if he hadn't. I was predicting, for example, that there would be some sort of bleed from Reform to the Tories. I mean, because you had, a prospect of a Labour government. Most people still who vote Reform would be natural Tories. I think the ratio between people when they're interviewed, when they're polled, is something like 4-1 in terms of Reform voters. Either way, those two factors, an unpopular government, Reform standing, and momentum in the Reform campaign did it for the Tories. So this wasn't so much an overwhelming victory. The left is right. It wasn't a positive endorsement for Starmer, his programme, or anything like that. If we look at the Labour vote, it isn't out of conviction. It was much more a negative vote. We want to get rid of the Tories. So there wasn't the enthusiasm that there certainly was back in 2017 with Corbyn, and what was the programme? Not the few, but the many, or is it the many, not the few? Shelley and all the rest of it. That was an enthusiastic campaign. It got the same, roughly, same sort of percentage. But all you needed to do was go on the street, go to a rally. I don't personally attend Glastonbury, but the crowd at Glastonbury, singing in praise of Jeremy Corbyn. I cannot imagine anything like that with Keir Starmer. No. Keir Starmer was a safe pair of hands. He was a boring politician, always wanted to be a boring politician. And quite frankly, I think he played a similar hand as Blair in terms of dampening down expectations. There wasn't any excitement. There wasn't any expectations. Nonetheless, some sections of the left, I just think bizarrely, talked about a possible crisis of expectations. Well, in order to have a crisis of expectations, there has to be expectations in the first place. And the reality of Starmer, I think you see what you get. He can't be any worse than the Tories. If that's an expectation, I think he's already delivered that he isn't worse than the Tories. And I speak here, I'm looking around at a few old folks, even though they've taken 500 bloody pounds off me, right? Winter fuel payments. I still think that we're in a situation of where there ain't any expectations as far as this government is concerned. Nonetheless, the left has taken some sort of, should put it, pleasure, some sort of, this is the future, some sort of, how should you put it, our time will come from the results. And it's the independents. So yes, we've got a number of independent MPs, not least Jeremy Corbyn, but at the same time, we also saw the defeat of George Galloway by quite some margin. At the same time, we did see, in terms of results, the only significant left result in terms of standing as a group, as a bloc, as a party, was George Galloway's Workers' Party of Britain. And there the left turn round, I think incorrectly, and say, well, it isn't a left-wing party. So on the one side, we're meant to take comfort in terms of the low turnout, the same percentage that elected this huge majority in Parliament this time round compared with a similar vote last time round for Corbyn. I think that this allowed the left to stand, and it actually, objectively speaking, provided the left with excellent possibilities. I can certainly remember, I must have been in the early months of the Starmer government. It's hard to actually know, it's just from somewhere in the back of my mind. I can remember having a discussion on the Provisional Central Committee with comrades, and I think we were looking at Tusk and saying things are pretty hopeless as far as Tusk is concerned, because the Labour Party is way down in the polls. The Tories are still ahead, amazingly. And to stand under those conditions, people will be simply saying, well, between a choice between the Labour Party and the Tories, we're going to vote to get rid of the Tories. And there isn't going to be that luxury that there'd previously been under different circumstances that gave the left that space. Well, there was this time round. As it turned out, for the last 2 years at least, the Labour Party has been way out ahead. And then you add in the question of Gaza with Starmer's predictable, just following right next to the United States. When Joe Biden makes a statement, he echoes it. And until Joe Biden said it, Keir Starmer doesn't do anything. So we had, didn't we, Keir Starmer talking about water and food and medicine and how it was right to actually deny people, the necessities of life. That was the Labour Party. So under those circumstances, you have to say, well, that does provide an explanation for the success of these independent candidates. When we look at the rest of the left, bar the Workers' Party, the performance has been absolutely abysmal. to the point where I would say, I think, in the past, Peter Manson, for example, would sort of do a breakdown of the left vote. And I've always taken the view over the last 2 general elections, 3 general elections, 4 general elections, I don't know. Look, comrade, it's a waste of time. We're dealing with such statistical irrelevances. It has no statistical purpose to it. It doesn't tell you anything about this group in relationship to that group. It doesn't tell you anything about, what do they call it, roots in the working class, except that there ain't no roots in the working class. And I'll give you an example. TUSC, the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition. This is an organization, true, we weren't applying in a particularly constructive way. From my memory, of our engagement, for example, with respect, we were very much approaching TUSC with the view of being bomb throwers, of being disruptors, of being in the business of exposing TUSC rather than building TUSC. But we were turned down from TUSC when we applied to join, not on the basis of, well, you're ultra leftists and we don't like your position on the workers' militia or whatever the hell it happens to be. We were turned down on the basis that we lack social roots, which we readily said, of course we lack social roots. But the idea that the Socialist Party in England and Wales has got social roots is risible. But this was at a time, remember, when if you wanted to talk about anything in terms of TUSC, you could have referred to Dave Nellis, the ex-Labour MP in Coventry. And the votes that he got were statistically, if we could just have one speaker, I'd appreciate it. His votes in the past were statistically irrelevant because he would tend to get something like 5%, 6%, 7%. I saw Dave Nellis on the last Gaza demonstration. I know him. I don't know whether he knows me. We were in the Socialist Alliance together, but I was wearing, as he was, because it was pissing down with rain, a hoodie. I used to wear glasses. I'm a lot older now. My hair's gone grey. So I don't know whether he recognized me, but I went up to Dave and said, do you mind I take your photograph, Dave? Click, 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 got the portrait that I was after. And I said, because I literally didn't know, because I haven't gone and looked at the left vote, because every report that I got, the vote was basically statistically irrelevant. And I didn't do it out of a sense of vindictiveness or, as an individual, Dave Nellis is a nice guy. But I actually asked him, and I thought afterwards, that wasn't a very nice question, was it? And I asked him, Dave, how did it go? What percentage of the vote did you get? 2.2. And I did, what was that, Dave? 2.2%. I said, oh, right. Keep up the good work. I didn't know what to say. I was that awkward moment. And the irony, for whatever it's worth, and it ain't worth anything, is of course their ex-comrades, ex-Socialist Appeal, now marketing themselves as the RCP, Revolutionary Communist Party. Their candidate, what was her name? Fiona Lally. She stood as an independent, on the other hand, so I don't know what that means. I don't know whether that meant that she got more votes as a result of standing as an independent or less. Either way, she got something in percentage terms, something like twice the percentage of Dave Nellis. But the reality is that the vast majority of left candidates got the 0.1, 0.2. I think I've seen some candidates actually listed. I thought that statisticians stopped at 0.1 and just sort of said, we're not going to bother in terms of our newspaper to break it down any further. But I have seen subsequently a 0.00. I have actually heard in some elections, I think maybe 1 or 2 elections, the candidate didn't even vote for themselves. But I don't, the point I'm really making is the left did appallingly, right? You know, if we look at the CPB, if we look at the WRP, there is no exception. If we look in Scotland, that had previously, you know, had MSPs, first of all, Tommy Sheridan, and then the six, they were down to English sort of levels of the 2 point somethings, maybe 3, maybe a bit. They only stood 2 candidates anyway. We did, in terms of the left, appallingly. Okay, let's have a look at the exception. And of course, some sections of the left look at the Workers' Party of George Galloway and say that that isn't the left. Well, okay, you know, we can say yes or we can say no. After all, if we look at Lenin and the Polish Socialist Party, he, for example, turned around, you know, in terms of Pilsudski, the leader of the PSB, he said, he isn't even a socialist. That's not a socialist party. But they would have said the same thing, remember, about the Socialist Revolutionary Party. At the moment, I'm rereading one step forward, 2 steps back, for example. And what you'll find from all sides of social democracy when they're talking about the socialist revolutionaries is an inverted commas around them. They didn't view them as a socialist party. Nonetheless, when it comes to a broad definition, I actually would say, of course, George Galloway's Workers' Party, look at the name, look at its position on Palestine, look at its position on nationalisation. It's on the left. It might not be the left that we want. It might not be the left we agree with. But quite frankly, if I look at Tusk, if I look at Spew, if I look at the CPB, if I look at the WRP, if I look at the RCP, I'd say the same thing. Of course, actually, what we're dealing with here is, though, something different. And it is quite remarkable. I actually did take the trouble of reading from cover to cover the Workers' Party manifesto. And I'm not talking about the programme that, I mean, I don't know whether it's even available now on their website, that was clearly written by the son and daughter, and maybe the dad, the Bra family, you know, with North Korea and Soviet Union, China, and all. No, if you look at the manifesto, what leapt out at me was the call for unity in Britain, right, between 2 classes. And we weren't talking, of course, you know, an equivalent of the Russian Revolution, unity of the workers and the peasants. They were the vast majority of the population in Russia. The Russian Revolution was always going to be fundamentally a peasant revolution. It could be led by the working class, but its actual content in Russia itself was always going to be a peasant revolution. I'll leave Europe aside. But if we look at George Galloway's party, what it was calling for is the unity between workers and managers. It actually thinks about managers as being part of the productive class. And in that sense, it reminded me distinctly of the Fabians, you know, the right wing of the labour movement in Britain historically, that looked upon landlords as unproductive, wanted to expropriate them, looked upon finance capital, banking capital as being parasitic, but looked at industrial capital as being productive, and wanted the workers to unite under the benign leadership of Sidney and Beatrice and Bernard and whoever these, as Engels called them in a mocking tone, these highly educated, I can't remember, get the tone right, but he was taking the piss about them. They thought they were one above everybody else. And they were going to take people to the promised land because, of course, the workers were ignorant. The capitalists, the enlightened capitalists, on the other hand, out of self-interest, could be taken to socialism. And I get that distinct impression from the Workers' Party. that what Galloway's putting forward in reality isn't a working class program. It's a class collaborationist program. And the reality is, again, this isn't a scientific analysis. It's much more a putting one and one and one and one. Didn't they stand near 100 candidates? I've looked at a few of the biographies, a few of the backgrounds. An awful lot of local businessmen were standing for the Workers' Party. I think in terms of, I can't remember the name of it, is it Crewe, somewhere like that? That the local candidate was the proprietor of doggy food, shoppy, or something along Dog's Dinner, whatever the name of the business was. That wasn't unrepresentative of the social nature, at least of the candidates in many instances that the Workers' Party was putting forward. So a very mixed list was being put forward, and it's clear that if we look at those voting for the Workers' Party, an awful lot of it, again, I haven't seen an analysis of it, but an awful lot of it was around the question of Gaza. So you definitely had a progressive vote. The demonstrations have been absolutely huge. I'm sure a lot of people who've been on the demonstrations voted for George Galloway. I would have voted for George Galloway's party if I'd had the choice. Instead, my choice was Labour, Tory, Green, or whatever, and I voted, sorry, as we said in the paper, vote Labour if you must. I had to vote Labour, not even left Labour. I didn't spoil my ballot. I was very, very much tempted, on the other hand, to spoil my ballot paper. But it's not only, myself who sort of said, well, George Galloway's party, it's a bit indeterminate. I'd still call it on the left, but it's a very peculiar left. Socialist Workers' Party does the same thing. And there's the problem. There's an article in a recent edition of International Socialism, the so-called theoretical journal of the Comrades. And in that, they've got an article looking back at past electoral alliances that the SWP has been in. And they cannot but deal, if you're going to write on that subject, you cannot but deal with respect. I mean, Socialist Alliance, okay, they don't really go into that. Respect. And the author says, well, but that was in the day that George Galloway was a left-wing firebrand. Right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I remember him as a left-wing firebrand. I mean, I remember him at the Stop the War demonstrations. He was and is a fantastic speaker. And I have to say, if one's going to rate, the speeches of the 20th century, I know you've got Zinoviev in Halle, and no, it's a great speech. And it's, in the atmosphere, translation, it's a fantastic speech. I had a fantastic, I don't know about impact there on the Congress because it was divided and the result was obvious. Either way, the speech I'm thinking of Galloway's is before Congress, right? There he is swearing to whatever, I don't know what you do before you speak to Congress. He took them to pieces, didn't he? He tore them, he went into them. He was brilliant. So that was his finest hour. Not, I admit, what's it called? Big Brother? I did watch that. I watched the only 2 episodes of Big Brother I watched was George Galloway and the cat with Rula Lenska. Right? No, I had to watch it because this mattered in respect. We were in respect. And if we, quite frankly, if we didn't watch it, we would have been criminal. And the only other one I watched was with what? Barrage. No, I didn't watch that one. I'm thinking of Mr. Suntan Man. Oh. I'm thinking of Tommy. I'm thinking of Tommy Sheridan. And actually, he wasn't that bad. Okay, I didn't watch the whole thing. No, seriously. He wasn't an embarrassment. But I have to say that George, dressed as a cat, meowing, how that went down in the Muslim community, or I know it didn't go down well with the SWP. They did find that, how should I put it, upsetting, discombobulating. Either way, what I want to question here is the idea back in the day, Respect, wasn't it founded 2004? It was the SWP that collapsed the Socialist Alliance. First of all, we had the Socialist Party leave, and I think they left. Again, this is my memory may be playing tricks with me, but I think they left in order to support candidates. They do choose their names, don't they? They wanted to support candidates for CATP, Campaign Against Tube Privatisation. We, I think, christened it, because I do things like that, we christened it CATP, just as we christened Spew Spew. I mean, if you're going to call yourself something, at least experiment. At least experiment at what your opponents are going to do with it. I know that if you take bourgeois firms, when they market cars, they test it out in the local language, because you can take an ordinary English word, for example, and in Thai, it can mean poo, which doesn't tend to go down very well if you're a consumer in Thailand. I want to jump in my poo, for example.
JRF doesn't mean wanker next.
Well, there you are. Okay, so let's look back. At the SWP in Respect. I also read an article, I can't remember his name, I think he might have been your defence barrister. Anyway, there's an article on the RS21 site, which isn't bad, looking at Respect. And the author there says, well, there were these resolutions put forward. I don't know whether they were done in goodwill. No, they weren't done in goodwill. We put forward a whole series of resolutions in order, basically, to roast the SWP, to make the SWP uncomfortable. What did they vote down when George Galloway was a firebrand, right? When he was a real left-winger? They voted down a woman's right to choose an abortion, and they replaced a woman's right to have an abortion with a woman's right to choose, bracket, to wear the veil. We're not against. They voted down free movement. They voted down international socialism. They voted down secularism. Peter Manson went up and talked to the leader of MAB, Muslim Association of Britain, Anas Al-Takriti, during that debate. And he said, well, what do you think about secularism? He said, well, what's secularism? And Peter said, well, it means all religions and none should be treated equally. And Anas Al-Takriti said, well, I think that's really great. I'm a secularist there. But the SWP voted it down in order to appease Respect, and in order, when it came to abortion, when it came to open borders, international socialism, perhaps, to appease George Galloway. So the idea that George Galloway has suddenly moved to the right might have done on some issues, but I'm a bit skeptical. No, it's the SWP, being in a popular front and then losing out to Galloway, losing out to the allies that they had in Respect. Again, a famous Peter Manson interview of a Birmingham candidate that the comrades put forward. What do you think about trade unions? Peter asked. Candidate, Respect. I think trade is a jolly good idea. That is the sort of character of the candidate that Respect had. Anyway, bringing it up to date, as far as I can see, if we look at George Galloway's party, I would still classify it as left-wing, but I would raise this question. It does strike me that in terms of what's going on in global politics, and I include, of course, Britain and the results of July the 4th, in spite of us having a left-wing government and papers like The Guardian and saying, at last, Britain is in the sensible league again. We've rejected the politics of madness. But But no, if you look across Europe, it's the right on the march. I mean, I don't know what the result's going to be in the United States in November, except to say, well, there's a good chance, 50-50 still, that it's Trump. If we look at France and the next presidential election, anyone who tells me Le Pen hasn't got a chance, that would be a pretty, it's going to be Macron's choice, is it? We look at Germany, AfD, Italy, former fascist. I do say former, not fascist. But wherever you look, the right is on the march. And precisely my argument about Britain, in spite of having a huge Labour majority in Parliament, add reform together with the Tories, that gives you something about the character of where Britain is at and also where Britain is going. And there is a left in Europe, and I'm only saying this as a sort of signpost, something for us to be aware of, something for us to arm against. There's a danger of some sections of the left. I can't remember her name. Someone will tell me. What's the former leader of Die Linke, who's standing under the name of herself? Actually, I'm not even attempting to pronounce it. Wagenknecht. All right. What's the initials of the organisation? What? BSW. Anyway, you know the organisation. But there's an article in a recent edition of the Morning Star by one Nick Wright. It's a two-part. I haven't read the second part. And Nick Wright, who's a former straight leftist, by the way, if that means anything to anybody. And he's actually saying that we should take reform UK seriously. Well, I agree. And what he's saying is that if you take reform UK, when the CPB comrades went out canvassing, and they had someone who's saying, well, I'm weighing up between voting CPB and reform. And the reason why I'm voting reform is those migrants. And what's your answer, CPB? Well, actually, their answer is to have immigration controls. But I get the hint that there is a left that wants to go along the route that Galloway has taken, the route that's being taken in Germany. I think that is a temptation in Britain today, which clearly is still moving to the right. And I'm not taking it on the basis of some riots. I'm taking them as a symptom. I'm taking it on the combined Tory reform vote. Okay. Well, what time have we got? So I've been talking about 3/4 an hour so far. Right, okay, I just need to know. Okay, well, let's start to try to draw things together, try to wrap things up. Okay, so I've looked at the general election, July the 4th. I've looked at how badly the left has done. I've looked at the only exception that exists on the left to that picture, in reality as a group, as an organisation that calls itself a party. Well, we're then left with what should the left do? And reading, for example, the report by Tusk, which is honest, I suppose they can be anything else. Our results were bad. Actually, they were bad compared with the previous bad results in 2019. The SWP works. The SWP takes a little bit of, how should I put it, what do you want to call it, a little bit of a boost from Maxine Bowler in Sheffield. I think she got 8%, something like that. Whatever the percentage was, standing as an independent campaigner on Palestine. And I'm sure the RCP are full of stuff, because again, I haven't read their paper for some time. The Communist, it's more or less unreadable. But I did at least pick up on join Fiona's party. I personally find that rather sick-making myself. Why does that trend throw up the equivalents of, Tommy Sheridan and Derek Hatton. I mean, why do they want to focus in on some attractive media individual? I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to join Fiona's party because I wouldn't be allowed to put forward my views in Fiona's party. That's why I don't want to join Fiona's. But Fiona is very welcome to join us. That's certainly the case. But what should the left do? This is the question. And we could, say, well, we're doing exactly the right thing. And I think we are. But if you look around us, I mean, the frustrating thing to me, actually, is that what we're in a situation of, bizarrely, is that more people seem to be calling themselves communists. And I'm not just talking about the RCP, which has rebranded itself on a global scale. I think on the basis, isn't it, of opinion poll surveying in the United States, where if you ask people between, I don't know, 15 and 25, what do you think of communism? Oh, I think it's quite a good, I don't know what the hell they say. Either way, I'm not just talking about that. I am talking about organizations such as Talking About Socialism. Nick Rack, for example, talks about now wanting a communist party, calling himself a communist. This is certainly a step forward from the Nick Rack that we used to know. I can remember Nick Rack in the founding conference of Respect, give it, do they call it fives or whatever it is? But you know that one? Anyway, it's some sort of stuff for teenagers. He was very much down there with the kids. I can remember Nick Rack in the Socialist Alliance being courted by the SWP because he was a leading independent. So yes, a shift by Nick Rack. Will McMahon calls himself a communist now. True, he did say that he thought the Tories would win the general election on July the 4th. That wasn't the case. Nonetheless, that's progress. The problem is that when we asked to talk to them, talking about socialism, they refused to talk to us. We have a similar situation. We've got a comrade coming later in the week, Kat, from, what do they call it? Communist Futures, which stood in Manchester Central. Again, same sort of result. Same sort of result. I do stress that we would have got. We're not exceptional. It's not. I'm not trying to attack the left for getting poor results because we could do it better. All we've said in the past when we've stood candidates before the Electoral Commission banned us from using our own name, that we would get the same results by standing on a principled position that the left would get standing on an opportunist position. Why doesn't Communist Future talk to the CPGB? Why did they have to go through a whole debate about only one individual doing it off their own back? Why can't that organisation talk to us? Why can't TASS, talking about socialism, why can't it have articles in the Weekly Worker? Why can't Communist Future have articles in the Weekly Worker? Why can't, what do they call it now, the Partyist? Why can't that have articles in the Weekly Worker? Why can't those comrades actually join the CPGB? I'm not saying that would make a party. That would be ridiculous. Our numbers are tiny. Our numbers would remain tiny. But it is about direction. It is about actually developing momentum. If we look, and again, I sort of feel a bit sorry for comrades in a certain sense. I can remember, when the Young Communist League went through its brief moment of suddenly appearing in the media, suddenly appearing on demonstrations, and some comrades were sort of, my God, it's the youth. Well, it actually was about 30 people, at its height. Nonetheless, they looked good, they were militant, and it was a step forward that the Young Communist League came into existence. But I also think where it's at now, it's more or less twinked out of existence. And I would predict the same sort of thing with the RCP. Nonetheless, the fact is that across the left, people were talking about the Young Communist League. You could find it in all manner of different papers. So you could find articles in Socialist Worker. It wouldn't name them directly, but you know and I know what they were talking about. You can find similar references to the RCP across the whole of the left. And precisely, if you take our organization, if it was joined by others in a process which we used to call, don't see why we can't revive it, communist rapprochement, communist unity, that would make an impact. Now, of course, it wouldn't transform the British political scene. It wouldn't do away with Reform UK. It wouldn't do away with right-wing Labour. But it would be a step in the right direction for a left that is quite clearly trapped, not in, how should I put it, Groundhog Day, of simply doing the same thing day after day and not being conscious of it. The left at the moment in Britain, and I would argue in a wider world, with some exceptions, but that's the general picture of a left that's repeating the same mistake again and again and again and again, and yet going in smaller and smaller circles. Now, you can trace back the origins of this again and again and again to any date you want. I mean, Mike has already spoken, about Comintern, deifying Lenin. One could talk about the 7th Congress of Comintern. That would be a truth. Either way, the left is diminishing in size. It's also diminishing in terms of its theory, its ability to think, its ability to actually come up with ideas that are worthwhile, that actually explain the world, let alone ideas that can transform the world. Okay, so just in the last few minutes, partially for my own pleasure, but now in terms of my own party cell, we are studying, I've already referred to One Step Forward, Two Steps Back, which of course is about the 2nd Congress, the real founding Congress of the RSDLP, which of course ends in a completely disastrous split. Lenin sort of is surviving sometimes, by a majority of 2. Sometimes he loses a vote. Earlier on, he loses votes. The Bund are then barred. He wins the election for the 3 editorial positions. Martov, the other editor, says, I'm not going to stand for that. The 2 editors that are left standing, Plekhanov and Lenin, as soon as the Congress finishes, Plekhanov says, I don't fancy this, and he walks. Either way, we're also reading not only what is to be, One Step Forward, Two Steps Back, fascinating account of the Congress written by Lenin in the immediate aftermath. What's interesting about Lenin, when he's saying to his readers, well, sort of welcome to my pamphlet, I've been writing this now for a month or so, he says, don't take my word for anything, read the minutes. And the minutes were published and they're available. They were produced by the WRP. And I really would advise comrades who are interested in, Bolshevik history, our history, to read that account. Anyway, I'm going to sort of get to the point here. Not that communist unity ends in disaster necessarily, although there is clearly a danger of that illustrated by the 2nd Congress. No, what I'm referring to is the opening remarks of the chair, the first chair of the RSDLP Congress, Plekhanov. I don't know what age he would be, late middle age, early old age, I don't know. He dies, 1918, that sort of period. Anyway, he's long past his youth, that's the point. And he looks at the Congress and says, at last, after 20 years of struggle, after 20 years at least, I can't remember how long he was in exile, but these comrades were publishing from Switzerland and they've been struggling to get Marxism into Russia. They've been struggling to get their ideas over to the Russian proletariat, who I would guess at the beginning of their struggle barely existed. And certainly when it comes to the founders of Marxism, I don't think that Plekhanov convinced Marx at all of the idea that Marxism has any relevance, the idea of a working class party has any relevance in Russia. This is the time when Marx is in the International and has aligned himself with the Narodniks. They're the first ones that translate Capital. Marx is sort of playing around with the idea, isn't he, in correspondence to one of to one of Plekhanov's comrades, with the idea of Russia bypassing capitalism and using the peasant commune as some sort of basis of socialism. But later in his life, Engels actually does come round to that idea, does come round to the idea, hey, it's the working class that's going to lead the revolution in Russia, something that Plekhanov and his comrades were insisting on as soon as they became Marxists. But anyway, the point I'm making is that Plekhanov is looking at this Congress and he's saying that we have now been vindicated. We have made progress. But if you actually look at the actual forces involved, we were talking about groups that the party, the RSDLP, was not clearly not in a situation where it organized masses of workers. It didn't. They were under conditions of severe oppression. And it's again interesting to look back at their debates. One of the early debates of the Congress is to say that it's going to be Iskra that's going to be the central organ of the RSDLP. Iskra was, I think, a fortnightly paper, heavily theoretical, and they talk about the need to have a paper for workers. And what they actually decide is we're not ready for that. So that gives you an idea of where things were at. On the other hand, after a few years, i.e., if you take 1903, by 1905, both of the major factions of the RSDLP had become mass organizations, right? Had become deeply embedded, had dug genuine deep roots in the working class. Now, again, don't want to leave anyone too depressed, but let me say this. The difference is clear, and that is in the 19th century, mass workers' parties, mass Marxist parties are being formed. True, Britain is behind. We have the Labour Party, half trade union, hopefully going towards a party. No, not going towards a workers' party, a bourgeois workers' party, an oxymoron. But throughout the rest of Europe and in other countries, these parties are being formed. So in that sense, if we look at Plekhanov, he's simply saying, and that's what Lenin did, if Germany can do it, we can do it. If France can do it, we can do it. If Italy can do it, we can do it. Where we're at the moment is a global situation, as I said, with hardly an exception of where the left exists on the level of sects and indeed exists at the level of confessional sects. All I can say is that in the same way, once it's done somewhere first, it then can become the model. And it's a bit like looking at the will. Once you see the will, you get the idea. I'm reminded, I'm going to finish with this thought. I don't know if anyone's read Jared Diamond's book, is it Guns, Germs and Steel? There's a lovely little passage in it, nothing to do with guns, nothing to do with steel, but he just recounts, I think someone from the Dakota Nation in the United States, right? And this guy just looks at these white guys, looking at these sheets of stuff with squiggles on it. And basically, this guy works it out instantly. I can't say what the Dakota word for writing is. Maybe he just invented it then and there. But this guy, having got the idea, instantly goes out, develops the Dakota alphabet, and ends up publishing the Dakota paper. In other words, if you can see that it's doable, if you can see it can be done somewhere, it doesn't take a great deal of time to reproduce that. And if we look at the world that we're in, and this is something we're going to explore through the rest of Communist University, quite frankly, there ain't much time. Mike alluded to the war drive today. And of course, we're not just talking about Ukraine. We're not just talking about Russia. We're not just talking about Taiwan. We're talking about the potentiality of nuclear exchange between the great powers. I will be speaking at the end of Communist University about climate crisis. And everything tells me at the moment that governments are absolutely incapable of doing anything else other than coming out with hot air. We haven't got the luxury of time. That is our tragedy. I don't think the world is going to come to an end, but human civilization could come to an end. And it can come to an end, I think, in two obvious ways in terms of what we're looking at. This is my concluding happy thoughts. It can end, of course, with nuclear exchange, or it can end with climate catastrophe, with large parts of the world becoming uninhabitable. And with that happy thought, I'm going to sit down.
You need to go around with